After the Second World War, Western countries were faced with the emerging phenomenon of both a decolonisation of the European empires and a corresponding unchecked population boom in the so-called Third World. A British report by the Royal Commission on Population concluded that Britain was, quote,
gravely threatened by population growth in its colonies, since a populous country has decided advantages over a sparsely populated one for industrial production. The combined effect of population growth and industrialisation in the colonies might be decisive in its effects on the prestige and influence on the West, especially affecting military strength and security.
In the 1970s, the American then Secretary of State Henry Kissinger would build upon the findings of the RCP with the National Security Memorandum 200, which recommended that policies for development be linked to a reduction in family size. This would culminate in the 1999 UN Conference on Population and Development in New York, in which 32 young people were brought in during the negotiations and given the floor. These young people demanded the following 3 stipulations to be included in any development aid granted by the wealthier nations of the UN. They were abortion as a human right, sexual rights for children, and a deletion of parental rights. Incredibly, they utterly neglected to include the somewhat more useful development aid provisions of, for example, access to clean water and education. Despite these youths obviously having been handpicked by special interests, this cheap and ignoble tactic of bringing in a non-inclusive group from civil society that claims to speak for everyone at international conferences is sadly used surprisingly often at the UN as a way of drafting coercive legislation without the semblance of foreign imposition. Attending the conference and astounded by the sheer amount of blatant hypocrisy surrounding the negotiations was a 21-year-old Anna Halpine. Halpine was understandably upset by the 32 manipulated boys and girls that not only falsely claimed to represent her, but also a whopping 3 billion of the world's youth, and she decided to do something about it. Using her own and somewhat then humble resources, Anna printed out a few hundred pink leaflets and went back the next day during proceedings to spread them around. These leaflets caused a considerable amount of commotion at the UN, and managed to stop the deliberations for several hours. Anna's leaflets were received very warmly by the delegations of developing countries, who then realised that the young people of the day before did not really speak about the real needs of the youth in their countries either. In fact, the delegates liked Anna so much that they decided to offer her a permanent presence at the UN, and the opportunity for her to meet and eventually work with young people in their countries. This organisation would become the World Youth Alliance. 1 year later, at the Beijing +5 Global Conference on Women, the US delegation offered this short oral proposal: human rights grant human dignity. This seemingly innocuous phrase was actually hugely significant because it tried to put the very definition of human rights within the hands of the state, thus overturning 50 years of human rights tradition in international law. Considering that the last time a Western country abused its monopoly of this definition was at Nuremberg in 1935, this was deeply worrying. At the World Youth Alliance, we hold the very opposite to be true. Human dignity grants human rights. This means that dignity is something that is intrinsic to the person, and a person's human rights cannot be tampered with by any legislative body. At WIRE, we continue to promote person-centred approaches to international development at the United Nations and the European Union. In solidarity with the developing world, we want to make people's dignity the main factor in drafting policy at international organisations, like the UN and the EU. If you want to learn more about WIRE, you can visit our website and find your regional branch or local chapter. If you like this video, then please give us a like on Facebook. Thanks for watching.